Great. Thank you so much, Marina, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming. What we're here to talk about today, and this resource that you can see on the right, is actually one of the highlights of my year. So I'll talk about how this came to be, and this is really what we're here to talk about, is what are Canadian organizations doing when it comes to fundraising, and how are donors responding, particularly online. That's going to be the focus today. What was so cool is that this was a joint project from Canada Helps, Charity Village, Care2, and ourselves at Next After to come together and try to provide data and information to add to the conversation. So you can see how online giving is trending, you can see how emails are being sent, and you can actually look at the emails themselves. So we all kind of came together to produce this resource, and the question that we often get is like, well, why? Why did you do this? So myself and Next After Institute, we were kind of the spearhead for this, and that's because our mission is to decode what works in fundraising and make it as accessible to as many nonprofits and charities as possible. We do that through experimentation and research, and we'd produced a similar resource in the United States. And as a Canadian, one of the things that I always find frustrating is we often have to rely almost all the time on US data when it comes to charitable giving and fundraising. Now it's getting better and better. Folks at Canada Helps, Charity Village, etc., are doing more. But we said, well, why not do the same kind of thing for Canada? And so we came together and produced that resource, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And so what we're trying to do is combine like applied research. So when we get into like tips and tactics on what you can do to improve your email fundraising, this is really based on real experiments where we're trying to find, what do people actually do? What do they actually respond to? Because your opinion and my opinion and our collective opinions, and particularly your board's opinions and possibly your boss's opinions, are often wrong, often dead wrong. And then the other thing we're trying to figure out are, what are organizations doing? Are they sending more email? Are they responding to COVID-19? Who does the email come from? We try to analyze and classify that type of information. And then we also try to marry this up with what we know about human behavior from other academics and different type of research of why do humans make the decisions that they do. And if we can kind of triangulate these different data sources of what organizations are doing, what people respond to, and what we know about human behavior, this is really a sweet spot for better understanding why donors do what they do and helping us all do better fundraising. So that's just a little bit going into like where this is coming from and where we're trying to head. So the first thing that we want to look at before we get into the email tips is really what's going on in the world of online giving. And for us, we said, well, who better to help with this than Canada Helps? And so we shot an email off to Canada Helps, and they were so gracious to share a bunch of their data and information. And so Sean's actually going to take over here and talk about some of the online giving trends that we're seeing in 2020, a little bit about the giving index that they've developed, and what online fundraising has looked like since COVID-19 has really hit. So over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Brady. Also thanks to Charity Village for today's webinar. Like Brady said, I'm really happy to share some of the insights that we've had, that we've seen at Canada Helps about online giving trends in Canada, both before and during the pandemic. One of the ways that we provide insights to help Canadians understand the charitable sector and its impact on Canada is the Giving Report, which is something that we first produced in 2017. Interestingly, in our 2020 Giving Report, one of the topics that we touched on was how Canadians respond to crises. And it's something that we had no idea would be as timely as it actually has turned out to be. The Giving Report, in the Giving Report 2020, we introduced this new concept that we created called the Online Giving Index, or the OGI, providing data and insights about growth of online giving through Canada Helps. So Canada Helps obviously is not all online giving, but we do, our data sources represents a substantial sample of online giving in Canada. So those data sources that's included in the Online Giving Index are really coming from Canadian donors, and basically it's donations that are going through Canada Helps online giving portal, where donors can donate to any of the 86,000 charities across Canada through fundraising software that we develop at Canada Helps. There's over 8,000 charity partners that we have that are using our customizable donation forms, peer-to-peer fundraising platform, and our ticketed charitable events platform. We also are seeing donations or having donations come in from donors using apps, APIs, and other partnerships that we run joint charitable programs and websites with. All of that coming together in May 2020, there were over 15,000 charities that received donations from these sources, which is just under 20% of all charities in Canada. So what sort of donations are included in this? So the various data sources that we have allow donors to make donations in a pretty well-rounded mix of donation types. Simple things as one-time donations or scheduled monthly donations, but also securities and mutual funds, individual fundraising campaigns for one or more charities, ticketed events, peer-to-peer fundraising, as I mentioned earlier, and our donations through apps, which also include things like employee giving programs, corporate donations, and special campaigns and partnerships. So all of this feeds into this concept of the online giving index, and I don't want to bore everyone with very technical details about how we put this together, but just to give you a sense of what it is, I'm going to try to be fairly non-technical here. So the index we developed was really to give Canadians a sense of how online charitable giving is growing. And the reason we did this is the data from the CRAs usually lagged by several years. I think 2017 is the most recent year that's available right now. And the other thing is it doesn't really break out online donations versus offline donations. So the index gives us a good directional sense of how online giving is growing. So the way we measure growth is we look at a 12-month period of donations, and we measure the growth over the previous 12-month period. That growth is then indexed against the baseline. So the baseline that we've used is January 2017. So basically, we looked at the 12 months ending in January 2016 and looked at how it grew over the next 12 months to January 2017. And then we basically created a baseline value. So that growth value that we saw for January 2017 was given a value of 100. Then we did the same measurement for every single month since January 2017, and basically came up with a value that is compared to the baseline. So a value above 100, basically that means that the growth is higher than it was in January 2017. A value below 100 means that the growth was lower than January 2017. One thing to note is that a value below 100 doesn't necessarily mean negative growth or a contraction. In fact, of the 41 months that we've measured the online giving index values, we haven't seen any contractions at all. It's all been growth. So how do you measure this? If you plot the online giving index values, you'll see slopes going down, you'll see slopes going up, peaks and valleys. Basically, the one thing to take away is downward slopes simply means periods of slower growth, and upward slopes means periods of faster or accelerated growth. So if we look at a little bit closer at the online giving index for 2017 through the end of 2019, one of the things that we've seen is that since around the second quarter of 2018, you'll see that the slope really started to go up there. And that just means a sustained period of accelerated growth, right? So compared to the period prior to that where the slope was down. Since May 2019, the index values have been over 100. So what that means is that these levels were above the baseline for the most part that we had set from January 2017. For 2019, it all culminated in December 2019. the highest index value that we had seen in the 36 months that we were measuring at that point. The value was 102.9. So December was so high in part because Giving Tuesday 2019 fell in December versus November of the previous year, but also due to just the continued accelerated growth. One of the things to note on this slide here is that November seems to have dropped off. This is also a matter of timing of Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday in 2018 was in November, and in 2019 it was in December. So the growth was much smaller than it would have been if Giving Tuesday had fallen in November again in 2019. Okay, so online giving in 2020. So you can find these resources, as Brady mentioned, on the Next Chapter webpage. But basically, online giving in 2020 so far was growing before the pandemic, but since March, it has really grown since then. So the first part of 2019, you'll see those the lighter shade of yellow on the bar graphs. We saw that all the values hovered around 100, all decent growth, but it was pretty stable and not really growing at a higher rate. We saw on the previous slide by December 2019, we were up to 102.9, sorry, in terms of the index value. And we see that in January and February, 2020 picked up where 2019 left off. 103.7 and 103.5 for January and February, seeming to level off around that 103.5 area in February. March is where we started to see another acceleration in growth. What we saw in our data and in the donations that were coming in through Canada Helps, almost immediately after the WHO declared the pandemic, we started to see increases across the board. The only two areas that we didn't see increases were the obvious ones affected by social distancing, and that would be ticketed events and peer-to-peer fundraisers. In April and May, so at the end of March, Canada Helps launched two COVID-19 related cause funds, and that certainly contributed to the growth that we saw in April and May. But again, we saw growth across the board and not just for any particular category. So on the next slide, we're talking about categories, and in fact, virtually every single category saw this increase. The only one that didn't see increase was the international category. So one of the things that we've seen in the past through analysis that we've done is that Canadians typically respond quickly to crises. When the crisis is within Canada, we see even larger response. So that is a possible reason why the international category has been the one that has not seen this increase. It could just mean that Canadians are indeed responding to the pandemic, and they're doing that by giving to Canadian charities or charities that are focused on Canadians. Another reason why we've seen increased growth across all categories is because of social distancing measures and how they're forcing charities into a digital transformation. Without in-person fundraising available to them, without people giving checks or cash to them directly, and even possibly limited call centers accepting donations over the phone, a lot of charities have now leaned on technology to help with their fundraising efforts. And it's one of the things that Canada Helps has seen. We've seen unprecedented new registrations of charities to use our technology to help them with their fundraising. Now, one of the last things that we looked at is the average gift amounts. And we've seen that the average gift amounts have indeed increased But the one thing to take into account is this doesn't necessarily mean that individual Canadians are giving larger amounts. One of the typical things that we've seen during crises, previous crises in our data, is that we typically see more donors giving lower donation amounts. Overall, the donation amounts in aggregate is larger, and a lot of donations coming in, but typically donors are giving smaller amounts, and we're getting a lot of donors who otherwise wouldn't have giving whatever they can. This crisis has not been atypical. We've seen that. We've seen some donations, some months have been slightly larger, but overall it's been around the same or slightly lower. What we have seen, and the reason why we're seeing that there's higher gift amounts, is that we've seen an increased participation of corporate donations, corporate donors giving large amounts during the COVID-19 crisis. And this is something that we don't see as much of in other crises. So it was something that has been pretty refreshing to see that all Canadians, including Canadian corporations, are really participating and giving back during this crisis. Yeah, so I'll leave this question here. So is giving up? I'll leave that to Brady to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. And communicating some pretty complex data in very simple ways. Appreciate it. One other interesting thing is this is actually opposite of what we see in the U.S. right now, where online giving is up, but the average gift is actually down or flat. So Canadians are responding on a per person basis more than the US, as we see online. So then the question is online giving up, right? You see all these green arrows to the right. No, online giving is up. Giving itself is not up. And I do want to make that very clear, because I've been talking for months now about how online giving is growing and it's an alternative. But when you look at actually other data sets, and it's a little bit slower when we look at offline data. So imagine Canada produced more survey related data, but I believe it to be true that the vast majority, 2/3 on average, of Canadian charities are raising less money than they did the previous year. And that makes sense. People are losing jobs, income is down, the world is crazy, in-person events have gone away. There's a lot of reasons why overall revenues are down. So I do just want to make that clear, is that we're kind of painting a rosy picture, but that rosy picture is really related to online, and some of those factors of why offline and total giving is down is actually contributing to online giving. So I just wanted to highlight that and make it clear. So giving is up? No, not really. Online giving is definitely up, but overall giving is down. So that's kind of the first little bit to just set some context about how have donors been responding online. But then we kind of want to flip over and understand, well, what is it that charities are doing? And specifically, email. Email is one of the things that we look and track. It's one of the things that we can actually analyze. And so why should you care about email, and what are we finding? That's where we want to spend the next little bit, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So in general, most of the time when we look at different nonprofits and charities all over the world, especially in Canada and the US, this is a rule of thumb when it comes to online fundraising. The more good emails you send to the more engaged people, the more money you'll raise online. Again, is it true 100% of the time? No, but generally speaking, this is the strategy around online fundraising in 2020. And one of the big reasons why, and when we see like the data like this, where email is the highest value channel, when we look at where does revenue come from, is that it's a high converting channel. So conversion is really just the percentage of people that make a donation that come from a particular source. So that's what we're looking at here in this chart, and you can see that email here is leading the way by far, converting about 4.67% conversion rate. This is a combination of Canada and US data, although it's generally more US. The email is converting close to 5%, just over 4.5%. That's 160% higher than the next highest channel. And if you look at some of these other areas like paid social and social, even paid search, email is way, 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 way more likely to actually convert someone into a donation, which isn't to say those other channels don't have value. They absolutely do. But when it comes to direct response, I'm going to ask you for money. Email is by far the best channel, is what everything that we have in terms of data says. So what does that mean about now in COVID-19? Is that still true? So again, in that resource that Charity Village, Care2, Canada Helps, and ourselves put together. Email was one of the things that we looked at. We did a study in 2018 where we made donations to 152 Canadian charities, and we got all their emails, and we still get all their emails. So we used them as a data set to say, how are Canadian charities responding when it comes to their email communication? So a few key things to point out is that email volume overall was trending up, but you saw this big spike around Giving Tuesday Now. So Sean mentioned the impact of Giving Tuesday in 2019. They decided to have a Giving Tuesday Now in May to help rally support, and we saw a huge uptick in emails. But even before that, you can see another big spike right around mid-March when, again, the WHO declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. We saw an uptick in emails going out, and that has largely been sustained, and we see a very similar pattern in the US. So the volume increase is also pretty much across the board. Now, our verticals for email don't line up 100% with the verticals that you saw in the Canada Helps data, but whether an organization is benefits to community, education, health, religion, or welfare, some a lot more, like health and welfare, which makes sense. They're a lot more on the front lines, but pretty much every vertical increased the amount of emails that we saw. And what's interesting is we looked at all the emails and said, well, how many of these emails mention COVID-19 or coronavirus or something related? And you can see that up until that kind of second week of March, almost no emails, very, very few emails were mentioning COVID-19. And then a huge spike, and now we're just starting to see that flatten or go back down, but it's been relatively consistent for the past couple months or so. And now we're starting to see messaging veer away a little bit from COVID-19. And again, there's many reasons for that as things start to open up, phase 1, phase 2. We're just kind of tired about hearing about it. You know, I know for a long time I couldn't handle any more news about it. I just turned it off for a bit, and now, you know, I'm learning more about it again because I need to. But anyways, we're seeing that kind of drop off. So the messaging is interesting to see, not just the volume, but the message being more relevant to COVID-19. We also looked at the mix. How many of these emails were specific to asking for fundraising? How many of them were newsletters, or how many of them were more like cultivation or engagement pieces? And we found that other than that big spike again around Giving Tuesday Now, the mix of emails was relatively consistent again. About 75% of the solicitations since March have mentioned COVID-19, which is a little bit higher than the US. And again, health and welfare were sending the most solicitations. But in general, it's not like charities, again, other than that Giving Tuesday Now week, charities in Canada weren't asking more often, but they were emailing more often. And some of those emails did also contain asks. So we saw that Canadian charities responded by sending more email, mentioning COVID more, but not necessarily asking more. Those are kind of the 3 key points that we saw at a high level. But then the question always is, well, that's great. That's what charities are doing, but how are people responding? Now, this is where we have a little bit of a gap in our Canadian data sets because we track the emails and then Canada Helps tracks the revenue, but they are disconnected. They're not the same data set. They're not the same organization. So it's hard for us to say exactly what is leading to more revenue. Now, luckily, we have a clean data set in the US that we can borrow from, and we know how humans behave, whether they're in Canada or the US, when it comes to fundraising emails. And again, that general idea of the more good emails you send, the more money you generally raise. And that has 100% been true in the US. So you can see here, not Canadian data, although if we had access to this Canadian data, I would almost bet all of my Tim Hortons dollars that this would be true. So this is only online revenue. You can see, look at this big growth curve from the January into May, how it's been basically growing every single year. So that's overall revenue. It's over 130% higher year to date in terms of email revenue. And that's driven by these underlying metrics. So yes, there's revenue, but why does that happen? And you can see that more people are likely to make a donation from email. Remember that conversion rate channel chart I showed you earlier? You can see up here how it's over 4.51% right now, which is crazy high for the spring. So it's got a really high conversion rate going on and continues to go up. So even with more volume, people are also more engaged. So more conversion means more gifts. And the average gift for email, you can see here where it's relatively flat, but it's still much higher than it was last year. So from email only, what we can see in the US is that this increase in volume and increase in message is actually directly leading to a lot more revenue, which is that main outcome. So again, use it as a bit of a proxy. It's not 100% the same, but again, I would bet a lot that this is the exact same thing that we would see here in Canada. So people are responding to email is the short answer. That's one of the questions that we always get. It's like, oh, well, I delete my emails all the time. I get so many emails. Well, that's great. I don't really care about how you manage your email inbox, to be honest. I care about how donors are managing their inbox, and that's why data is so crucial. And what we're seeing in the data is, yes, volume's going up, more people are sending more emails, but they're also responding, which is why it's critical today and also every day when it comes to online fundraising. All right, so that's some of the data that we're finding. Hopefully you found that useful. Maybe you have some other interesting data points to bring to your board or your colleagues or your boss. But we want to spend the rest of this time digging into a few quick tips of how you can maybe optimize those fundraising emails today and then answer as many questions as we possibly can. So I mentioned earlier we do this type of data research, but we also do experimental research all over the world. And so I'm going to show you some real experiments with real organizations and show you the actual results. So here's an email test, 2 different emails. You can see that one logo, donate button, the other one, all that information and design is removed, and it actually increased donations 272%. Or in this experiment, this is a sender test. This is testing an individual versus an organization. And just from sending from an individual, in this case, they saw a 28% increase in email opens. And then the last little experiment here that we'll use as a bit of a case study is email pointing to a donation page, which is how fundraising often goes. One of them includes a video, the one on the right, option B or treatment B, and option A just uses text. It doesn't actually use the video. And by using the video, they actually saw a 71% increase in clicks. But we're trying to optimize for donations, and this is really critical. It actually saw a significant decrease in donations by using a video. So often we'll do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we'll have people vote, and what we end up saying is, y'all don't know. I'm from Canada, born and raised. I actually just moved to Texas a few months ago, which is a weird time to move to Texas. But the best thing, other than the sun, has been I get to say y'all all the time. Y'all don't know, but neither do I. And again, this is why testing and data is so critical, because a lot of what we see, what works that donors are responding to, is really opposite of what charities are doing or what we think. So again, based on all of our takeaways, kind of trying to summarize over 2,500 different experiments and all of our research, the biggest takeaway for email fundraising optimization, or how you can improve your emails, can we get a drum roll? The more personal looking, sounding, and feeling an email is, the more likely you are to get a donation. That's actually a bit of a common thread through those 3 different experiments. So when we look at the components of an email, there's a bunch of different ones. There's the email envelope. This is why someone would actually open your email. It's comprised of things like the sender, the reply, the send time, the subject line, the preview text. This is what you see on your phone, probably, but maybe on your desktop. When you make that quick decision, do I even want to open this email? Should I forget it? Do I star it? Do I put it in some folder? But then once you actually open that email, this is where you see these other elements. You see how it's designed, how you're greeted, what the copy says, the tone and voice, and what the call to action is. So these are kind of like 10 different components of an email, and we could probably spend an hour on each and every single one. I'm just going to highlight, again, really quick, these 5 with a few little tips for you today, and then we'll kind of get into questions. So 5 ways you can optimize your fundraising emails today. Let's start with the sender. So here's the problem, right? We said the email volume in Canada and the US is going up, and that's just nonprofits. There's a lot of for-profit brands. People get a lot of emails. So how do you stand out in an inbox? And one of the suggestions for you is send your emails from an individual. If you remember this experiment where it led to a 28% increase in emails, that was from an individual, not an organization. And a part of the reason why this works is we need to understand, how do people manage their inbox? And in a word, how you and I and most Canadians manage their inbox is triage. We get so many emails, the only way we can possibly keep up is triaging them. And the only way you can possibly do triage in a quick way is through something called impression. Now, impression is really this idea that you're making decisions at a subconscious level, where your brain processes like 11 million bits of information, as opposed to like, sitting down and consciously going through every email subject line and making this decision. Your conscious mind is so much slower, processes 16 to 60 bits per second. So we're making these snap decisions, and the folks at Litmus and Fluent did some research into, well, how are we basing these snap decisions? And they found that it's actually who an email is from that most people make their decisions when they're triaging their inbox. Now, again, whether you believe that to be true or not, so much that this happens at a subconscious level, I don't trust your answer either way. But what we see is that this often works and often helps you get more emails open. You can have the best message in the world in your email, but if you can't get someone to open the email, they won't actually even see that message. So it's a critical part of the email fundraising journey. And again, here's a test where it says organization versus the person's name, comma, organization. So maybe they weren't willing to go all the way and just send from an individual, it was too risky or something like that. But just by adding in the person's name before the organization name, they saw a 38% increase in email opens. Now, we've seen that type of test work time and time again. And it's not just sending from an individual, it's sending from a particular type of individuals. So this organization has tested their way into sending emails from a person, often Albert Reyes, who's their CEO. And you can see here's an example of what their emails looks like, subject line, person, and it's signed off by Albert. And they said, well, what if we sent from someone else, a different person in our organization? In this case, it was a vice president, someone that maybe doesn't send all the emails, someone that they said, well, maybe this would stand out or engage in a better way. They saw an 85% increase in opens and 150% increase in donations. Exact same email, just sending it from a different person. So maybe there's different people within your organization that you can actually send these emails from. It's not always your ED or CEO, but maybe it's a fundraiser, maybe it's a comms person, maybe it's a programs person. Maybe there's different people that you can send emails from to stand out. And now it's not just standing out from other organizations necessarily, it's just standing out, period. And what we see is that the vast majority of Canadians, when we did this study a couple of years ago, almost 3/4, just over 3/4 send all of their emails from an organization. And so when we look at that inbox again, it looks like this, right? There's very few examples that have a name attached to it. And again, we say all the time, fundraising is about relation, it's about connection, and then we send brand heavy emails from organization names that doesn't really fit like a lot of what we know about human behavior and fundraising. So here's the thing, whether you believe me or not, and hopefully you do a little bit, it's such an easy thing for you to try. Send your next email out, split it into a test, try sending from someone else in your organization, see what happens and see for yourself. I can almost guarantee you'll see a different response. Positive or negative, you'll get a different response, and then you can learn from that. So test it for yourself. So that's one little tip that you can try to get more people to open. But what about once they open, what can you do to actually engage people and move them to a donation? So on the design front, here's a tip, remove it. Remove design elements. Now this is maybe controversial, and if you're a designer, I don't want to hurt your feelings necessarily, but when we look at this type of experiment where there's a huge increase in donations with no design elements, or in this case, removing something as cool as a video, we actually saw a decrease when the video was added. The concept here is, unless you know for sure that this design element is helping your donors engage, remove it. Instead of the other way around, I think we often start from, well, this is what everyone else does, so let's put our logo and our image and our buttons and all this stuff without really understanding if that actually helps your donor engage and respond, which is the whole point of the email anyways. This is what we send with our clients, some of the largest nonprofits in the United States and Canada. This is what we've tested our way into in terms of what an optimized fundraising appeal looks like. You might be thinking like, ooh, that is gross, right? I don't think we could ever send that. And again, this is a pretty easy thing for you to test. Do your normal email, that's your control. Remove all that design stuff, that's your treatment, send it out, same donor pool, same email, see how people respond. We were lucky enough to convince a pretty well-known branded organization in the United States, NPR station KUW in Seattle, to do this as a test. So they ran this test themselves. You can see on the left, branded elements, image, goal, person, buttons, and on the treatment here, they just removed all those design elements. The copy and the message was the exact same. The design elements, bigger clicks. The no design elements, bigger increase in conversions, which again is your goal. And we see that all the time. But then when we look at Canadian charity emails, this is real examples in our inbox. And again, on that resource page, you can click through and see for yourself. Look at how we're sending emails. You see a common pattern, right? They all kind of look the same. Logo, image, then get into text, often with big donate now buttons. Why do we start all of our emails with this? Why don't we start from the other side and figure it out? Now, I used the US example. Unfortunately, we just don't see a lot of Canadian examples. We found that it was about 3% of all the emails we received, only 3% use that kind of personal approach. And then there's fewer Canadian organizations that are testing, and then even fewer that are willing to share those tests with us. So we don't have a lot of Canadian tests. So if you are testing, we'd love to hear it. But I put it out on LinkedIn and just like, hey, what the heck is going on? This seems to work. Is anyone testing this? Is anyone trying? And so some of the responses we saw, Eric Rubidoux from Yibo Digital Said we've had a couple massive wins, a couple flops. So again, it's not going to work 100% of the time. It's all Canadian data. Cassandra, Alvina Wong from Union Gospel Mission. We've tested plain text email several times. They've done really well. Help click-throughs and conversions. Cassandra, yeah, we've tested it. We did see better results. Greenpeace Canada's in here somewhere. Yeah, we strip back and have been stripping back our emails for many years. Our email revenue's up 132%, kind of using the strip back approach. Kim said we did a plain letter from the CEO twice this month, more opens and clicks than any other piece we've ever sent. Christine says engagement has increased and we're getting to know many of our donors better. That's the other benefit, is you actually get replies back from email and you actually get to converse with different donors. So this isn't a US thing. That's not an us thing. This is not a US thing. This is a human thing. We're more likely to engage when we think it's and it feels more like a human. There's this concept called social presence, where we actually interact with technology and digital things that are more similar to a human experience. We're more likely to engage and respond, and that's some of what's going on. Plus you stand out, plus you can focus on the message, which is the main thing. So maybe remove those design elements. Maybe you need to use a bit more copy to ensure donors know why they should give to you today. So if you're using less design, how do you substitute copy? This is a pretty crazy experiment. Option A, about 550 words. Option B, over 2,200 words, but it increased donations 106%. 2,200 word email increased donations 106%. Now, I'm not advocating for 2,200 word emails here, but I am saying we see this a lot. Short email on the left, a little bit longer on the right, more clicks, more donations, and more generosity on average. On the left versus the right. On the right, short, sweet, to the point, a lot more clicks, no difference in overall donation, and people were a lot less generous versus the one that took more time to explain why a donation is needed. Your goal in a fundraising email is to send a motivated click to your donation page with someone with the intent to give. This isn't like a click to read to find out more, and you just want to click and have them watch a video. You want them to take action, and that starts in your email. So longer is better. No. I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm saying you probably need a little bit more copy to answer this question. If I'm your ideal supporter, why should I give to you as opposed to another organization, or not at all? Just continue with my day. This is the question that we try to answer in our research. And in Canada, we found that less than half the time, it was not clear, right? So is it clear what your donation will be used for? 40% of the time, no. So just about half. No, it wasn't clear. And this because organizations aren't using copy enough and well enough. So it's not just having words, it's how do you use those words. So real quick, do you have a problem to solve? This is something that you should probably introduce pretty quick and early in your email. What is the problem, so that I can know what my donation will actually do? So clearly and concisely address the problem your campaign is solving for. I think that's partly why COVID, so many organizations are raising money, is the problem is so easily to identify for people. We understand the problem so quickly. Now that's not always the case, so you have to help the donor understand what is the problem that you are facing. And once you can do that, now you can move to a solution. Well, what happens if I actually give? And again, this is not, we need your support. This is what your donation will do, right? It's the opportunity that they have through you to solve that problem. So now you've established a problem that's easily understood. And now, hey, here's the solution that you can make through your donation. Hopefully there's some element of building trust, right? Why should you be trusted? Just because you say you'll do something doesn't necessarily mean I inherently trust you. So do you have some reasons why I should trust you? Why should you be worthy of my gift? Why are you the best organization to carry out, my values and beliefs? And now this could be something like a quote or a testimonial, or we've been doing this for so long, we've already seen some success. Imagine Canada Seal. There's different ways that you can build trust. But it's just saying the idea here is just because you say so doesn't necessarily mean that I trust you. So how can you build in this other sense of trust? And then is there a way to incentivize people to act now, right? So again, this is a part of the reason with COVID is we understand the urgency that's happening. So when we're not in a crisis situation, often it's hard to create a sense of urgency, right? A lot of your missions aren't going to be solved tomorrow. They're going to be around. So why should a donor give today as opposed to 2 weeks from now? And this is where we can use things like external or internal incentives, or external or inward rewards or incentives, to actually provide a reason for people to act now. And these are where we kind of use more gimmicky marketing things, right? Campaign timelines, only 2 days left. Matching gifts. If you give today, you'll be matched. Or challenge gifts. Become a recurring donor today, and this corporate sponsor will make another gift. Sometimes it's even like, we'll provide a free content offer. Pretty much any other thing that we can add to the mix to kind of sweeten the pot and encourage a donation today. Again, that's not the reason why someone gives, is because of a match or because of the incentive, but it's an extra reason why they should give today, right? So let's look at a real Canadian example that was in this study, or in this data that we showed you. It comes from the United Way Lower Mainland. And so here's the email that they sent. So things that we already kind of have learned. So maybe some ways that we could optimize and improve it. Let's just get rid of that huge logo hero image. And is this image really helping? Who knows? So let's get rid of it. So why not send an email that looks more like this? And then we actually look at the copy. You can see that they actually have some of this stuff. Now, it's not in the exact same order as kind of what we said or what our template is, but here's the problem. 98% of nonprofit community partners have seen increased demand for food and cannot meet current needs. Clear, concise problem, easily understood, right? So more needs to be done because families are still going hungry. Also, pretty easy to understand. They have a solution. Again, it's not totally sequential, but hey, we need to provide food at no cost so people that don't have, the funds can actually receive food. That seems like a pretty good solution. So their goal is to actually expand this program from 20 United Ways to 50 United Ways. And then they try to tie it into a little bit more community focus, right? Your friends, neighbors, single mom in your community that you can help. So here's the solution that your donation will have. They don't do a ton on the Act Now, right? It's just police support our relief fund today. It's not a great call to action, to be honest, but this is what you can do to act now. And then they actually have a little trust in here earlier on where they said, to date, you've stepped in, so framing in the donor. To date, your support of the relief fund has helped launch and operate 20 United Way local love food hubs in neighborhoods across the Lower Mainland. So saying, we're already meeting this need, but there's so much more that needs to be done. They're subtly saying, like, we're having an impact, we just don't have enough funds, right? It's their way to try to get at trust. So problem, solution, trust, act now. Those are kind of 4 key components that should be in any email. Is this email perfect? No, but you can see it has some of the core components. Another thing to try is a more personal human tone. So we've already talked about how removing design elements can help. What if you actually use a really human tone? So if I look at this example where they saw another huge increase in donations, let's put them side by side. You can see a logo. People generally don't care about your logo. Let's put it at the bottom. Big old buttons. Does it really help? Let's use a hyperlink. But it's really the tone that I want to focus on. So on the left, when your world has been turned upside down, every connection counts, every bit of strength, every heart brought together. Versus the right, I know we've been using Caring Bridge recently to stay connected to your loved ones, and I hope it's been a source of strength for you. You can just hear the difference. One sounds like you're reading this kind of poetic prose story, but you're talking at me, versus the other one is very, very, very conversational or uses more of involving type language. And so when you stack it all up, the design elements plus the copy plus the fact that it's really focused on you, you've been using your loved ones for you, for those like you. You is a magic word in fundraising. When you add in that type of tone and approach that is involving and focused on the donor, you see a huge increase in donations. And again, the good part of this email, look, I sincerely hope that you and your family, very personal, first person, I'm saddened, right? Signed by a person, Michael McKnight. This is great. It's personal. It's relevant. They also do a lot of this. Our nonprofit, our relief fund, help us, our goal, our relief fund. Generally speaking, the bigger of a brand you are, the more likely you are to do this. And it really doesn't help donors. I really don't care about your goal. I want to help people in my community. So one tip here is to you can do this, Control F, look for we, us, our in your name, and just try to find ways to turn that into you or your language, or write your email and read it out loud. It's pretty amazing how you can hear how organization-centric you can be when you just read your email out loud. Last key point here is have a very clear, direct call to action. So if you remember this example from earlier, where it's remove the design elements, part of it is, there's a school of thought like, hey, let's hit them with the donate button early and often to make sure they see it. But you haven't really explained problem, solution, trust, or act now. It's just a donate button. So I might click, but I'm not motivated to click yet. Or then they do one paragraph and then ask to give, versus on this side, all this problem, solution, trust, act now, and then at the very bottom, after I understand why I should give, they have a clear call to action to donate. So 2 things. 1, make sure you have a clear call to action, and make sure you've given enough reason for someone to give. Just having a link to give isn't enough. It has to come in sequence after you've made your case. And we see this all the time, right? Make your year-end gift, first stand with us. More clicks, fewer donations. Where you can securely give versus where you can find out more. More clicks, fewer donations. So when it comes to this call to action, be very clear. Make your secure donation online today here, right? Something like that. Clear call to action. So I kind of went quick. I wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions there, but here's a quick recap on those 5 ways to optimize your fundraising emails. Can you send it from a person instead of an organization? Maybe different people within your org. Do your design elements definitively help? If not, maybe remove them. Do you have enough copy, text to explain why a donation is needed? Problem, solution, trust, act today. Can you use a more personal tone and voice, right? Use this tip, maybe read it out loud. See, does it sound like a human? Does it sound like something you'd say? You have a clear, direct, straightforward call to action. Maybe even try a hyperlink or a raw link. A raw link is just that exposed link even. We've seen that work. So those are 5 ways and tips. Hopefully found something in there interesting and useful. If you want to kind of go deeper, the main thing that we'd like to point you to is that resource page that we've built together with our partners, again, where you can see the data, the online giving data that Sean and his team is providing is updating every month. And then the charity email trends are updating in real time. So every week, if you wanted, you could come back and see new email examples and click into them and see. So you'll also find other links to Canada Helps Giving Report, Care2 resources, our resources, and Charity Village resources on that page. But we'll send out this link afterwards, I believe, but this is where we'd like to point you, where you can find out more about Canadian fundraising response to COVID, as well as the different partners that have come together. So I think we have a lot of time for questions. Hopefully you have a bunch of questions. Thank you so much again, and a huge thanks again to Charity Village for having us, Sean and Canada Helps for providing that data, and also Care2 for helping publicize and share some of this data as well. So let's get into some questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brady. That was data packed, as you promised. I want to just mention to everyone, because we've had quite a few questions about it, yes, you will be getting the slide deck. We will be making sure that you have the slide deck available along with the video recording, so not to worry about that. Diving right in, so we've had a lot of questions about the longer emails. Too long didn't read syndrome. We know that our donors aren't reading beyond the first few lines. What do you have to say about that, Brady? What are your suggestions, thoughts on folks that are concerned about the longer emails?
Few things. One, how do you know? What is it based on? Is it based on what someone says? Is it based off what a board member says? This is, again, where data speaks volumes. 2, it's a pretty easy test, right? You can write a short version of an email and a longer version of an email. And then the third thing, and this is why it's really not about longer versus short, is if people are making it past your first paragraph, maybe your first paragraph sucks. It has nothing to do with length, but what your tone is, right? When we look at a lot of emails, a lot of them start very much like no greeting, no salutation, no why I'm emailing you. It just dives into like, we need your support today. And it's so kind of like transactional and organizational centric. I don't care how long or short it is. It's very off-putting. It's not a great way to start an email. So again, we could spend an hour probably just on how to start an email in a way that engages the donor. But the concept is you want a bunch of little small yeses in your copy that keeps people engaged. So by the time they hit that call to action, which should probably be a bit lower, they're motivated, they know what their donation will do, and they're more likely to click and give. And again, if you optimize for clicks, short image video will almost always win. This is why it's really critical to try and see what leads to donations and not just clicks. So again, it's not necessarily long versus short. What are you basing that decision off? All of our research suggests you probably need a little bit longer of an email than you think, and base these decisions on data, not opinion.
Yeah, no, that's great. And on a similar note, there was a lot of surprise in the comments about the text versus graphic emails. One question, in the first 2 experiments that you showed when you first were showing that, was the copy exactly the same, or was the copy a little different?
In one of the experiments, the copy was identical, and in another experiment, the copy changed. So there's a concept in testing called variable clusters, and so you can change multiple elements along a common hypothesis. And so what we'll often do is say the hypothesis here is that a more personal email will perform better than a designed email. And now if you just change one element like the design, but the copy is still super organizational centric, you're not really testing the hypothesis. So we'll often change the design as well as the copy and the tone so that an email sounds and looks and feels more like it's from a human. And then kind of once we've established that, yes, that is the correct path that does outperform, and it almost always does, that's when you can get more into the nuances of what exact copy, which type of sender, how long should it be, where does the ask go, should we do a supporting image? But it's called a radical redesign test, and a variable cluster test is why multiple elements were changed.
And let's talk about email subject lines. What are you finding works?
Yeah, good question. Again, we spent hours on that. What we found is when we did analysis of subject lines for fundraising emails, we found there's really kind of 5 kind of tactics or levers that you could use. The most important one or the easiest one is the concept of you. So just, use a merge tag and put the person's name in there, or just say you in the subject line. So write your subject line and actually just put you in there. So that's one. A mystery, if you can kind of leave just a little hint of mystery. You don't want to do bait and switch, or something that's like, win a free cruise, and then it's nothing about a cruise. Like, that's not mystery, that's just lying. But just like a hint of mystery where people are like, oh, kind of what's in there, right? It could be special update for you today, Brady. It's like, oh, this is for me. You use my name, and I'm kind of curious to know what's so special about it, right? That's kind of leveraging mystery. We can do things like make sure it's authentic. Oftentimes we're willing, or we try to do things like act now or before it's too late, and kind of our spam filter, our human spam filter rises, and we go, that sounds kind of, marketing, not really what I'm into. So that's something to avoid. Make sure that the subject line is authentic. You can focus on what the benefit or actually is in the email. So what they'll actually get from opening the email is another kind of lever that you can pull. So mystery, utility, authenticity, and I'm forgetting one. But those are some of the things that we found that work in subject lines.
And moving from subject lines to preview text, different emails, programs should display the preview text differently. Should the important info be included in the first few words? And is the preview text as important or not as important as the sender subject?
Yeah, great question. It's not as important is what we found. Now, those 3 things work together. Again, if you're trying to go for a more personal email and the sender's personal and the subject line's good, and then your preview text is like view email in browser, well, that's kind of a giveaway, right? So the general strategy is actually remove that HTML junk. And if you start an email like, hi, Brady, hope you're doing well today, or the reason why I'm emailing you, you actually most tools will just pull in the first text as the preview text. And we've tried to test that and kind of game it where we use the key points, or we kind of use the preview text strategically, and it at best is neutral and at worst does worse. So the strategy is actually just remove any indication that it's like clearly a marketing email and just have it pull in the text is what we do.
And we've had quite a few questions about how to technically do the send from an individual. Should that come straight through an email program, or do you recommend like a newsletter or a mail program like MailChimp or Constant Contact or something like that in order to track?
Yeah, always use an email provider if you can. This really the only way to manage like unsubscribes, and they have email service providers and kind of ISPs and things that will help increase deliverability. So if you're not using an email service provider, you really, really should be. And so the strategy is actually you get to choose who that email comes from, and most organizations choose like an info at or donor services or something like that. So the suggestion would be like I actually send emails from Brady at Next After, which is kind of good, kind of bad, but what we'll often suggest is create like a Brady J. So it's called an alias email. So it's not the exact same email that your ED or founder or yourself actually uses day to day, but it looks just like a personal email. And so that's actually what you'll put into, say, MailChimp to say send emails from Brady J at organization, and that's who the email goes out from, and then that's who the replies will go back to, and then you just forward those replies to your own personal inbox or have someone manage it. So yes, all this is actually done in email service providers like MailChimp or HubSpot or things like that. It's just you're making it look just like you sent it from Gmail or Outlook.
Yeah, and then as you're getting more integrated at your organization, that's how you're tracking those clicks and conversions, correct?
Yes, totally. Yeah, exactly. And then it gets into things like UTM tags, and it gets a lot more specific and data nerdery after that. But yes.
As you said, we could do a much deeper dive on that down the road. Okay, this is a great question about demographics. So the tactics that you referred to in the last part of the presentation, do you find that those also apply to previous donors? For instance, donors that have been giving for maybe even the last 10 years. The question is, won't they get annoyed if we keep drilling home the problem over and over again? Should the tactics be different in that case?
Yeah, potentially. So there is often a bit of a difference in messaging loyal donors or long-term donors and, say, non-donors, of course. There is a little bit of that. So there's two forms of problem, right? There's like the big macro problem that your organization exists to serve, which is really your mission. I'm not saying say that every email. Your mission should never change. People should know what it is, but missions don't really raise money. What I'm talking about is a more tangible problem, like what will my donation do today? So, you know, you may your mission may be to eradicate homelessness in Calgary. Great, but the problem that your email right now is trying to figure out is, you know, how do you provide job training to this way more people that have lost their jobs and are maybe now on the streets? Like maybe that's the tangible problem that you're trying to solve. And I don't care how long a donor's been giving to you. Every donor wants to have some sense of what my donation will do more specifically, even if they say that they don't. So those are more of the problems that I'm talking about. So your macro problem really never changes. But when you think about fundraising appeals and campaigns, you should be highlighting different types of problems throughout the year and throughout their kind of donor lifetime.
And do we have any data showing how email compares to direct mail?
There is that data. I mean, most organizations still raise more money on direct mail than they do on email. But what we've seen is the best way to increase direct mail revenue is actually to send people email, even if they never give online. Our data says it's 90% increase from people who only give you checks just by receiving email will actually give you more money on checks. But you also look at the trends, and direct mail's trending down. I mean, it's going to be super relevant, and I'm not saying don't do direct mail. But again, when it comes to online fundraising and how to grow quicker, cheaper, more effectively, and well into the future, that's where the argument for email, I think, stands out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. And we're running up on time, so this will be our last question for today. But how many emails are too many? The question is, we've had people unsubscribe if we send too many too close together. Is there a sweet spot?
Oh, that question is impossible to answer. One, you shouldn't be optimizing as much to avoid unsubscribes as you should be optimizing your emails for engagement, right? If someone doesn't really want to receive your emails, then you actually want them to unsubscribe, because if they just stay on your email list and don't open and don't click, they'll actually hurt your deliverability. So having people unsubscribe isn't that big of a deal. You'll get anywhere from 15 to 20% of people that unsubscribe every single year. That's just the nature of email fundraising, which is why you need to be acquiring emails. So if you're trying to avoid unsubscribes, you're A, going to not raise as much money, and B, probably be optimizing for the wrong thing. So if you optimize for engagement, you'll probably end up at a strategy where you send more emails, but with fewer things in them. So a little bit more frequently, focus on one thing. And what we generally find is there's no magic number. It depends on quality and what's the message. Does it suck? Is it good? But in general, organizations can send a little bit more email. So if you send one a month, send two. If you send three, try sending four. But again, it's all about the message and what's actually in those emails.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're going to cap the questions there. Brady, Sean, did you have any final comments before we sign off?
Not for me. I'm good. Thank you.
Same here. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to you both. This was such a great presentation, so full of data and information and really practical stuff. We really appreciate you taking the time to present for us today. I want to remind everyone we will follow up with you by email this afternoon or by tomorrow morning at the latest with the full recording and the slide deck. We're going to include all the links that Brady and Sean mentioned, as well as some extra goodies as well. So definitely check that out. There will also be a short survey that will take less than 5 minutes to fill out. And if you do complete that for us, you'll have an opportunity to let us know if there are other topics you'd like to see covered in a future session, and we'll share the feedback with Brady and Sean as well. I'd like to remind you that Charity Village has lots of resources available to you, including our dedicated COVID-19 resource page. Our job postings are currently available at a 15% discount until June 30th, and you can also access a $10 discount on our online courses through June. These discount codes are included on that COVID-19 resource page, and we'll include a link to that in the follow-up email you receive later today as well. Additionally, please come to our site and post your volunteer and event listings, including virtual events. You can do all of that for free. And we have the article library, dozens of webinar recordings, and of course, our weekly podcast as well. So on behalf of Charity Village, thank you all for joining us today. Our next free webinar will be held next Thursday. We'll have Imagine Canada discussing social finance. We'll include a link in the email we send today as well in case you would like to register. So thank you again for taking part in today's webinar. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.